Well, a balloon has become the latest flashpoint between the world's two biggest superpowers. It led to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken indefinitely postponing a trip to China just hours before he was scheduled to depart. And for some analysis, we're joined by Dr. Evan Resnick, who is Assistant Professor at S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Now, Professor, as we've heard, Mr. Blinken has postponed that scheduled trip to China. Now, he would have been the first Secretary of State to travel to the country in more than 5 years. So how much of a missed opportunity was this for both countries to stabilize their turbulent relationship?
I think you're absolutely right. It was a missed opportunity. It would have been unlikely that there would be a miraculous resurrection of bilateral ties between the two countries as a result of Blinken's visit. But given that the relationship has become so precarious and acrimonious in recent months and years, it probably would have been for the good for Blinken to have made the trip and potentially met with the Chinese president to at least impose some stabilization on a rapidly eroding relationship.
And meanwhile, China's response is that it's urging the U.S. not to escalate the situation. Now, based on Beijing's response to the balloon incident so far, how likely is it, do you think, that Mr. Xi himself had approved the mission?
It's possible. I have no idea whether he did or did not. But the bottom line here is that countries spy on each other all the time. Great power adversaries especially spy on each other all the time. The U.S. and China engage in espionage against one another across multiple means and techniques. And so there's a lot of pearl clutching going on right now on the part of the U.S. government. But everybody knows that this is a routine matter. The problem is when you catch the other side doing it red-handed, you have to sort of exploit it for all that you can in propagandistic terms.
And this is really not the first time that a balloon has been found. The Pentagon says that there are instances that this kind of balloon activity has been observed over the past several years. So why now? And why is the U.S. only addressing it this time?
I'm not sure. It's possible. There's some reports that these surveillance balloons were detected during the Trump administration, but Trump didn't do anything about it. Given that the relationship is it's so acrimonious, it's so hostile at this stage, and quite volatile, that any minor incident has the capacity to escalate into conflict that neither side really wants. But for these sorts of incidents are routine. It happened during the Cold War in 1960, just as President Eisenhower was about to meet the Soviet president in a summit. The Soviet Red Army shot down a U-2 spy plane, and then the summit was canceled. So these things have happened before in great power politics, and both sides just have an irresistible opportunity to exploit it as much as possible, especially the U.S., especially the side that catches the other one.
And speaking of the U.S., do you think the idea of domestic politics actually has a lot to do with it as well? We know that this comes ahead of Biden's State of the Union address. How does domestic politics impact the way Biden is responding to this incident?
I think domestic politics is really driving the U.S. response right now. Biden does not want to look weak in front of a newly elected Republican majority in the House that has been criticizing him relentlessly. And if it wasn't this, it would be any other number of things. But it would look incredibly pusillanimous for him to allow Blinken to proceed with the trip in the immediate aftermath of this spy balloon incident. So Biden is really playing politics here, and he's apparently running for re-election in 2 years. So he wants to remain president of the United States, and so he'll exploit this for all he can. And he certainly doesn't want to become a pincushion for the Republicans.
Well, let's take a look at the state of affairs between U.S. and China at the moment. This definitely comes at a time when the U.S. is boosting its military presence in the region. And we also have tensions that are running high over Taiwan. And then we also have that possible visit by U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. How will all of this complicate the existing thorny issues between both sides? And is there a road for resolution here?
The underlying dynamic here is that the United States has been the dominant great power in the Asia-Pacific region since the end of World War II, and it is for the first time facing a peer competitor at least a near peer competitor in China. And so that basic structural relationship is going to cause problems. And so all the stuff that we've been seeing in the last few years can be attributed to this underlying power dynamic or power transition between the two. It's going to be difficult for these two countries to stay at peace, but there are lots of important reasons for them to do so, not least of which the fact that they're both nuclear armed and the two biggest economies in the world.
And in what areas do you see that there can be room for practical cooperation between both the US and China?
They have a lot in common. And perhaps the most important thing they have in common is that neither one wants to engage in an all-out war against the other, given that both powers are nuclear armed. So they both have a shared interest in keeping crises tamped down. They also have shared interests in making sure that the global economy doesn't implode, especially in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. And they also have a shared interest in combating potential Armageddon in the face of climate change. So there are lots of reasons for these two countries to for the relationship not to get much worse than it already has been. There's lots of avenues for the two countries to cooperate, at least to some extent.
Professor, thank you so much for your insights. We were speaking with Dr. Evan Resnick, who is Assistant Professor at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies.